Welcome to the Biotech Startups podcast by Exceeder. Join us as we speak with first-time founders, serial entrepreneurs, and experienced investors about the challenges and triumphs of running a biotech startup, from pre-seed to IPO, with your host, John Chi.
My guest today is David Lee, CEO and co-founder of Meliora Therapeutics. Meliora's goal is to develop life-saving cancer therapies using cutting-edge science and machine learning. The company derives a comprehensive picture of how drugs interact with cancer biology by combining biofunctional readouts from numerous modalities using advanced machine learning and other computational techniques. Before Meliora, David served as Chief Business Officer at Everest Detection, an early detection liquid biopsy startup, and was head of commercial operations at Benchling, a life sciences software platform company which has achieved a $6 billion valuation and has attracted over $500 million in funding from firms such as Altimeter Capital, Tiger Global, Lone Pine Capital, Benchmark, Sequoia, Excel, Lux, and numerous others. David began his career in Goldman Sachs Healthcare Investment Banking Group and KKR's private equity group, where he advised and invested in transactions worth over $10 billion in enterprise value. David's multifaceted experiences in the financial and life science sectors gives him a wide range of experiences that founders can learn from. Over the next 4 episodes, we cover a wide range of topics, including David's early years in China, Kentucky, and Chicago, his journey from finance roles at Goldman Sachs and KKR to his work at Everest Detection and founding Meliora Therapeutics, and his pioneering work in using AI and ML for drug development. We'll also explore his experiences at Benchling, his mentorship roles, and his insights into the biotech industry, from early-stage lung cancer detection to precision medicine and targeted therapies. Today, we'll chat about David's childhood in China and Kentucky, developing a passion for biology and chemistry at a young age, and his experience in the UPenn Life Sciences Management Program. We'll also touch on his time at Goldman Sachs, insights he's gained from Fortune 500 CEOs, his mentorship through NeedU in New York City, and his ongoing commitment to innovation and patient impact. Without further ado, let's dive into this episode of the Biotech Startups podcast. David, good to see you. Thanks for coming on the podcast.
Thanks so much, John. Excited to be here.
Yeah, it's we've been really looking forward to this. We always, want to start the conversation in the earliest days so folks can really learn vicariously through your lived experience. And turning back the hands of time, what was your upbringing like, and how did it influence your leadership style and business philosophy?
Absolutely. To bring it all the way back, I was born in China, came to the States very young, 3.5 to be precise, and then landed in Kentucky, of all places. My dad was a software engineer, and my mom also was in the IT field. They were graduate students coming over from China. And so that's where we landed. And I spent 9 years in Louisville, Kentucky, and then high school through at Chicago in a suburb called Naperville. And it's a classic kind of middle-class suburb kind of place, all American. It was, went to a large public high school, and then ultimately found my way to the East Coast and to college at Penn. It was a very big change in terms of culture and language and environment, surroundings, and everything, to go from Hunan, China, which is where I was born, where my grandparents were taking care of me, to Louisville, Kentucky, when I first came to the States. And I think that really shaped me at a pretty formative time, where I got comfortable being kind of an all ball out and really being able to be adaptable, really being able to feel, I think this is important, kind of gain a sense of self, even though it is very different than what the mainstream was, speaking or talking, and kind of really was able to find comfort in self-confidence. I think that's also a journey every leader needs to take, is kind of really finding their own true north. Why do they want to do it? What is their own motivations? And trying to kind of how to lead through adversity. So that was very, very important for me. But also another big part of ultimately where I landed in terms of being in biotech is having a really strong focus in the math and sciences, even since childhood. And I remember even in middle school, really being excited about biology, chemistry, being excited about kind of really digging deep into learning around the physical world around me, and having a strong curiosity, reading a bunch of science books. I used to read biology textbooks front cover to back cover, which I think a lot of my friends thought I was really whacked out to be doing that.
Yeah.
And that led in high school to several research internships and also experiences that really helped shape my academic and ultimately professional career goals. In the summer of my sophomore year in high school, I was selected to attend a program called the Research in Biological Sciences at the University of Chicago. It's essentially a on-site. You stay there a couple months. You get to really work in a lab as a high schooler,
Wow.
understand what research is, get your own project at the end of that experience, and put together methods, data, results, put together the whole 9 yards in terms of a paper output. And that was really, really eye-opening. I thought I really understood better what science was all about and kind of like crystallized what that interest could be. That was then a springboard into uh, being part of science competitions. At the time, I think it's called Siemens, and I think it's called something else now. But anyway, just being a part of science competitions, even in high school, that allowed me to see the broader scientific world beyond, AP biology, AP chemistry, and kind of wrote, memorization from a textbook. Um, and that really grounded me, I think, ultimately in kind of what later on in my career I would go on to do. I remember I was dating myself a little bit, but kind of uh, that 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 period of time was also right when um, Fire and Mello got the Nobel Prize in RNAi, and it was such a breakthrough in really molecular biology and the techniques that would be possible. And so all of that I thought was it was really exciting and kind of really kindled my interest from an early age into my interest in science and thinking about what I want to do later on in my business life.
That's amazing. Like, frankly, I'm a bit jealous because my early introduction into the sciences was the rote memorization. And I was like, oh, I can't do this anymore. Like, I really can't.
Yeah.
Is this really all there is, like, in front of me? It's just like just jamming facts into my head. And got lucky, like, to get a lab experience in my undergrad, and to hear about just like your ability to get that exposure in high school is so cool. It's like really, really cool. And I guess, with your upbringing was, obviously your parents, were in graduate school. Did they kind of like foster this love of like the sciences at the home, or was it just like something where it just like came from within and you're just like, oh, this is like I have a great resonance with this?
No, it's a great question. My mother was a physician back in China, but she changed jobs.
Ah, okay.
Um, changed professions really when
Yep.
she came to the States. And my dad was a math teacher. And then, so I think the two of them had the math and sciences well covered
Yeah.
back at home.
Yeah.
And I knew all along I wanted to do something kind of in the math and sciences, but it really was until the high school time period where I I remember being in kind of AP Bio and biological sciences classes were some of my favorite classes growing up.
Yep.
Um, really wanting to do more, engage with the subject and the topic, and that's ultimately the reason why I started looking for camps that might allow me to do
Yep.
research even at a pretty early age. Um, and yeah, so I think it's just one thing led to the next, and
Yep.
perhaps it wasn't like this seminal moment where I knew, but
Yep.
I just felt, hey, there's something interesting, and I would go out and kind of read up on some paper, and then kind of think about, hey, how could I actually do this in practice,
Yep.
and that led me to some of the experiences I had.
Very cool. And when you were talking about the kind of moving to Kentucky, so my parents also had a similar experience. My parents came here for grad school as well.
Mhm.
And so also as kind of like a leader of a company, I know exactly, I share that same feeling of like, taking that kind of like oddball, like just being the odd one out. And I see how like now I've kind of internalized it, but a lot of the time, like founding a company, you are like, it is kind of a crazy thing to do. Like, and you got to be kind
Absolutely.
of comfortable. You have to be comfortable in that, like in the pocket. But and unlike, in football, the pocket being where you want to just like the safe space, it's like, this is where it's just like, you are looked at as a crazy person for a very long time until you're not crazy. And, you're now successful or whatever it may be. But I think about it in my upbringing too. I was like, like definitely was an odd one out as well. So that really resonates with me.
Yeah. Yeah. I think it's a tricky balance, right? You kind of have to be both an oddball out, but right.
Yeah, yeah,
It's the
yeah,
combination of the two that's
yeah.
important. And yeah, so I think, being able to think independently is perhaps oftentimes the harder one to get right because you're growing up, you want to fit in and kind of, have friends and be popular, et cetera, as all kids want to be.
Yep.
But I think channeling that into a way that is really kind of laser focused on ultimately what you want to do and the impact and things like that are things that yeah, I think about all the time. How do we kind of nurture that? And even for example, the next generation, like that those are questions that I do think about quite a bit and kind of exactly harken back to my earlier days, when I first came to the States.
Absolutely. And so now you've kind of found this spark for science. And you're now, you're onwards to your university experience at UPenn. How, one, I know you got, you studied biology, but what got you to kind of also focus doubly on finance as well? Was that just like a kind of a thing where, yeah, this could be fun as well?
Yeah, no, it's a good question. So I actually chose Penn because they accepted me into the dual degree program, which I attended called the Roy Vagelos Life Science and Management Program. It was a very new program at the time. I think I was the second or third year in the program. But Vagelos is the longtime CEO chairman at Merck and had really given the thought that perhaps a lot of scientists should know more about the business of making drugs and being in biotech. And on the flip side, perhaps more folks on the business side in the suits could actually understand the fundamental science that is driving the value in the business better. And that's why ultimately he decided to start this dual degree program. It's a small program still, 25 kids per year, and it really gave me an incredible exposure to life sciences entrepreneurship and also thinking about kind of the career trajectory that I ultimately wanted to take. To give a little bit more context on kind of how that all unfolded, then one of the experiences that you're required to have in the program is you're required to have essentially kind of an R&D internship and a business internship. For the R&D internship that I had, I knew I perhaps even back then knew I wanted to do something kind of earlier stage, more entrepreneurial. And I think partially it was also, I think this is actually a request I made to our director who helped set up the internship. I wanted to come to the West Coast and get some sun and be in
Yeah.
California for a bit, and just see what it was like. And so I ended up spending a summer in 2009 with Ari Belligan and down at UCLA. And he at the time was thinking through, so he'd already been successful entrepreneur in biotech. He was thinking through his next ventures, but he ended up starting in that summer Kite Pharma and really thinking about the novel technology platform that was cell therapy. So I was just kind of a fly on the wall during that summer, talking to a scientist, putting together papers and data to really think through the initial experiments we wanted to run, what were the initial kind of key proof points we wanted to unlock, go no goes, et cetera, and really inspired me to think about, wow, this is something that we're just thinking about, but actually could actually improve the life of a patient. A lot of folks then asked me, why did you stay and things like that. But I was only, I don't know, sophomore as it was back then, and just didn't have anything. Kind of, I didn't know, left and right in terms of what I wanted to do and kind of what was even happening, and or even how potentially special of an experience that could eventually be. but I learned a lot from Ari and his team, and that really planted the seed for later on when I was thinking through my career path back to that initial experience. How do we get to really making clinical and patient impact, and thinking thinking very, very critically about a career path that may lead to that. So that was absolutely huge in terms of setting a real spark for me, and ultimately being very focused on life sciences, and particularly entrepreneurship in life sciences. On the business side, I think what really happened there was Penn is a extremely pre-professional school.
Yeah.
Many East Coast institutions, I think, are like that, but Penn, I would say, especially so. I mean, you have the Wharton School there, and just a lot of, I would say, gravitational pull on campus towards certain career paths. And kind of the saying goes that everyone there who thought themselves smart and hardworking thought the best experience that coming out of school was probably in either finance or consulting. And so I thought, hey, I too am a smart and hardworking person.
Yeah.
Maybe I should do that. And so yeah, so then I decided to choose investment banking as my career choice coming out of school. Worked hard to be able to land at the right spot, and was very fortunate to start at Goldman. And that was in New York. And I had an internship at Goldman for my junior summer, which then converted into a full-time, and really learned a ton at Goldman. Really, really had a fantastic experience. Can't say enough positive things. I think there's a lot been bandied about, in terms of the just the negatives of being in the industry, and I think those certainly can be true. But for me, I was a 22-year-old, 23-year-old out of school, being in boardrooms with C-level folks, at critical junctures during time points in a company's life cycle, when they're about to be sold, or they're about to buy someone, or they're going public, and it's a really seminal moment for these businesses. And to be in the midst of that, in the room, when the CEO decides, whether what they're going to do, or to be a big part of those discussions as kind of a fly on the wall. Of course, as an analyst, you're so junior, you're lucky if you're in the room, but many times you were. You got to really rub shoulders with some really high-powered folks, and you could see the gravity of the situation as well, in the sense of these moments impacted not just the people in the room, obviously, and the shareholders and whatnot, but people's livelihoods were impacted. Patients were impacted, and thinking about whether certain drugs would get to market or not, and whether they would get financed or not. And it was really eye-opening to be able to have that. So can't say enough good things about getting started at Goldman, but that's ultimately kind of the first initial mix of having science, but also getting my first kind of training experiences on the business world as well.
That's amazing. I mean, it sounds like the dual degree program, you were able to utilize it. You it's very rarely when you come out of your kind of early education where you're like, I'm using my degree exactly right now, in the early gigs. And so, but being in healthcare at Goldman sounds like the perfect marriage of the two. And, for the scientific folks out there who are listening, who may not be as familiar with the finance side, and investment banking, broadly speaking, first, could you just define for everyone what even is investment banking? What is investment? What is it? And then for those who, and this is maybe a two-part question, those who want to have a similar experience and learn the chops and be in those rooms, how do you even land an investment banking job? So I guess two questions there.
Yeah, maybe just fundamentals of what is investment banking. There's a lot of parts of an investment bank. Being an investment banker I would really make the analogy, which is sometimes commonly made, which is essentially you're like a real estate agent for pieces of land, and in this case, the land is actually a company. And so what you're doing is you're either providing a service of trying to sell the company, in the sense of whether it's a merger or an acquisition, some company's trying to buy you. You want to make sure you're getting a fair price. You want to make sure that, similar to having a real estate agent, when you're selling a house, you want to make sure that there's a nice kind of flow to the story. You want to make sure the room's all decorated nice. You want to make sure the lawn's all taken care of. And so a banker will come in and really be able to put that together for you. And also, similar to a real estate agent, they see a lot of transactions, right? So they see, what is a company like yours supposed to be trading at in terms of the assets that you have, the indication you're in, your stage of assets, certain in multiples in certain cases, if it's kind of a more traditional revenue-driven business. And on the flip side as well, when you can be represented as either a buyer or a seller. So in cases where you're trying to buy a company, whether you're a large pharma company or another financial organization that's trying to buy some revenue stream like an asset or a royalty or something, you want to make sure you're paying a fair price. You want to make sure that you're really getting kind of the best price possible for the asset you're buying. So in the most basic instance, that's kind of how I would think about investment banking, what people do. Maybe a little bit to break it down to the level of what you learn at the kind of analyst level or even kind of the more junior ranks, because it is very different. The roles exchanges significantly over time. When you just come in, you're really learning how to run, I would say, valuation analyses for different types of companies and assets. And for me, that was the biggest draw. How much is this company worth because of these assets that it has? How much is each asset worth? How do you then put it all together and then say, okay, I'm going to put a premium in all this and then buy it? How does that all come together? And so I was really fascinated by understanding kind of the key value drivers for a business and for a biotech in particular. And I think that is helpful even until to this day, where I'm now running a therapeutics business. We have to think about ultimately, how is Wall Street going to value this? What is the value that's going to be capture and value unlock that we need to return to investors? And that does have significant, I think, strategic guidance, even when the earliest stages, when you're thinking about target selection and indication selection and things of that sort. To the second part of your question, which is around investment banking as a career path and kind of how to get in, I would say there's really two clear entry points. One entry point is right after undergrad, and that but some people actually go do another job, corporate finance job, work as a financial analyst and something else, and then come into investment banking. That is a career path I've seen happen. To do that, you probably need to do a lot of networking, and but that's kind of the case as in most places in the business world. The second natural place to get in, that's kind of a structured intake opportunity, is after grad school. So right after, so it doesn't necessarily have to be an MBA, but any type of grad school program, there are some kind of on-campus recruiting place, opportunities for some institutions that allows you to kind of really meet banks and enter that career path. So those are, I think, the kind of two natural places. I have seen ultimately later on in people in their career, especially in biotech, where you may, for example, go into a different part of the investment bank at first. Maybe you're an equity research analyst or sell-side analyst, which is different than being an investment banker. Equity research analyst is, you're basically providing an investor, a public markets investor, a service to say, I'm covering the happenings of this stock, of this company, and basically writing up a report and keeping up with the market and the times, which is different than, so that's truly like a service versus as as an investment banker, you're representing a client, rather than you're representing a single client rather than providing a service towards the market in general. So my point being that there are opportunities as someone being on the sell side, analyst, as a equity research analyst, to go into investment banking, and also vice versa. There are also times where investment banker may decide to join a sell side service.
Very cool. Something that you said that really stuck out to me was how you carry the lessons learned, like the valuation kind of aspect of of a given asset and what that might mean on the other side. Bringing that into the various earliest, most nascent days of a company is so critical. I'm painting a very broad stroke here, but sometimes, at least in 2020, 2021, that was not really a consideration. It's just like, to the moon, send it. Like, we're going to send it, versus this analysis that you're kind of talking about now is far more like, no. Like, this isn't something we can just pray for at the end. We need to be very, cognizant, and we need to plan around this, because that means, and that's better for all the stakeholders. And I'm going to imagine, being at Goldman, you can kind of, like you said, you see the transactions. So you kind of know, the process, and you see how things are actually unfold, rather than just it being, theoretical and a prayer.
Yeah, exactly. I think there's a lot of nuances to how do you pick an indication that will ultimately have clinical impact. And I think that should be the North Star. North Star is, let's make a patient's life better, extend their life, really change their life meaningfully in a positive way. With that being said, I think the only way to have patient impact at scale is to unlock value for investors, so that we can get the capital to repeatedly have patient impact. And that means that we need to be very cognizant, at the very least, and very strategic, as your kind of operating principle around thinking through, is this the right program for a small biotech to be running? Do we have a chance at really having an outsized impact in a certain indication or a certain treatment paradigm? I think that really, um, like you said, in terms of building the models itself, I have put the models together where I spit out a number that says that this many patients, this many sales, with this type of reimbursement, and these types of costs on the other end, what is the cash flow we generate? And I wouldn't say that I've also, we'll just get a little bit further into um my trajectory of my own career. I'm a big believer in innovation, and big believer in platforms, big believer in uh, having that innovation bring a brighter future for us. And so we can't just be, counting our cash flow and being like, okay, that's it. But at the same time, we need to deliver real value. And I think that that's a good barometer for determining if we deliver real values, if someone is willing to pay for it.
Yep, absolutely.
That's probably true.
And you hit the nail on the head. And I've again, I see kind of a similar, at least I feel in my own experience, of how it is critically important to be able to go, kind of use your, not a left brain, right brain, but it's like to be able to kind of have these two disciplines play together and walk that line. Is great. Capital formation is critically important, but also you're right. The innovation on the other side of the spectrum, critically important. And you need to not forget and neglect either side. And probably the pendulum swings, every so often. It's a healthy kind of tug of war amongst your teams, I'm going to imagine.
Yeah.
But also for anyone who's the capital formation aspect of it is put yourself, to be an empathetic, as a leader, you need to be empathetic and really think about, okay, at the end of this, if we're gonna, what's the public market's gonna think, and what's big pharma potentially gonna think, and they themselves are running that model that you're it's like an empathetic exercise. You're I'm going to imagine they're going to run a model like this. So let's try to put ourselves in the best position as possible, but not necessarily have that be the 100% governing factor to what we do here. And honestly, I'm jealous too. It was much later until I learned, when I came out of the lab, Excel was I was like, oh my God, how do I do this? And then when everyone was telling me, oh yeah, you're not even supposed to use your mouse. I was like, what? They're like, oh yeah, that's a drag on how quickly you can get things done. And I was like, oh my God, I'm so far behind. So impressive that you were able to do both the science and also just be a absolute, just modeling wizard.
Well, I think over time you kind of have to have both, right? As you're saying here, you really have to understand the science, how it translates. I'd say some basic financial model understanding is perfectly fine, as long as you understand the value drivers. And there have been so many really impactful entrepreneurs that didn't know the finance side, right? That really that were really pioneers on the science, and ultimately captured in some sort of clinical value. But I think that is the bottom line: is there clinical value here? Is there a difference in someone's life that was made, and that really can change their health trajectory. So yeah, I think Goldman in that sense really trained me to have the right orientation for kind of ultimately where we landed. The other things I learned from Goldman are uh, it really helped, I think, to uh, be more confident walking into any business situation, knowing that, hey, I've seen, Fortune 500 or Fortune 100 CEOs and how they talk and how they walk and how they, even small things, how they shake hands, how they treat the room and how they treat their teams. And I took a lot from that because I hadn't, growing up, I hadn't had any interactions like that before. So learning how to be professional, learning how to kind of comport yourself and move around in the business world, so to speak,
Yeah.
is, if you've never done it before, it seems like a totally foreign world. But once you've seen it once or twice, you're like, oh, okay. Like, that's just how kind of meetings are run, how board meetings are run, how intro pitches are made, some very basic stuff. But I think stuff that it does make an impression. It is important in the business world, and at least I think so. And it does make difference as well in terms of your ability to successfully raise money as an entrepreneur, successfully recruit people. Like these small things, I think are very indicative of kind of the overall quality and feel of an organization. So I definitely took a lot from that from Goldman as well.
Absolutely. And I get, before moving on from Goldman, were there any like, specific mentors or colleagues that kind of took you under their wing while at Goldman?
There's so many, but I'll call out, I guess, a few. Um, I worked with an associate that I was an associate. She was an associate. I was an analyst at the time, and she just really showed me the ropes of all types of different types of analyses. It was a really hard driving boss. Really learned what it feels like to have pages on pages of red ink, just fixing every detail. But it's because they care, and it's because they care about their own work. They care about your work. They want to make sure you're growing. Um, uh, so her name was Naomi Leslie. So if she ever listens to this, I really attribute a lot of my learning to working closely with her. But there were a lot of people like that at Goldman. I think that they really cared about training and up leveling their people well. And to the point I made, right prior on kind of how to think about organization construction and culture, I think having a really high bar is really something that you have to see and feel it to really know what it feels like on a day-to-day basis. And that is, I think, probably the biggest learning from Goldman is the kind of the standard they hold themselves to, their organization. I now in my career and personally as well, I kind of have this saying, which is how you do one thing is very indicative of, generally speaking, of how you do everything, even the smallest things. And when I went into Goldman, I think there are a lot of things I was like, oh, that's like no big deal. Like, why not just take the shorter path? And it always comes back, like some, small shortcut that you took either on data or the presentation or analysis or whatever, it always would be caught. And I realized over time, it's like, okay, just build the best foundation. Just take the time, go steady and go as slow as you need, but with urgency. Yeah, I think that early in my career, having been able to be exposed to that really gave me a lot of ideas later on, being, helping shape and form my own organizations. What is important, even from kind of the most strategic things all the way down to very, very small details.
Absolutely. I'm getting fired up. I get fired up about this because like I preach the exact same thing in Exceeder. It's like just like the level of attention and care that it's like, it's just so critically important because those become habits and it becomes the DNA of your organization. This is how we behave and we hold ourselves to this very high standard. It's critically important. And kind of on the mentor kind of wavelength. I know, you were a mentor coach while in New York and New York Needs You. Can you talk a little bit about that? Was that simultaneous with Goldman?
Yes, that was simultaneous. So New York Needs You was a organization, it still is an organization that pairs first generation college kids with young professionals who can help coach and guide through their career, early steps of their career path. And so I had the opportunity to work with, basically these were folks who were at City College or community college in New York City, and very often came from just disadvantaged backgrounds. And it's really very, very compelling work in the sense that you have a meeting. It was actually pretty intensive for the first couple of years. You'd have a meeting pretty much every Saturday, I think, for quite a number of months. But they really want you to really start to make a difference. Kind of, I think if you just have a call here or there, it's kind of like, okay. But once you do it like a weekly cycle, it becomes powerful in the way that you can really drive change. So I took a lot out of that. That was really great. And learned a ton about, especially seeing the grittiness and resiliency of folks who really want something. I think it adds more kind of color and fuel to the fire for myself personally as well, to take advantage of opportunity for whatever life can give, because we should not take it for granted. There's it's important, I think, to have that reminder sometimes.
That's all for this episode of the Biotech Startups podcast. We hope you enjoyed our conversation with David Lee. If you enjoyed this episode, please subscribe, leave us a review, and share it with your friends. Thanks for listening, and we look forward to having you join us again for part 2 of our conversation with David. The Biotech Startups podcast is produced by Exceeder. Don't want to miss an episode? Search for the Biotech Startups podcast wherever you get your podcasts and click subscribe. Exceeder provides research labs with equipment leases on founder-friendly terms to support paths to exceptional outcomes. To learn more, visit our website www.exceeder.com. On behalf of the team here at Exceeder, thanks for listening. The Biotech Startups podcast provides general insights into the life science sector through the experiences of its guests. The use of information on this podcast or materials linked from the podcast is at the user's own risk. The views expressed by the participants are their own and are not the views of Exceeder or sponsors. No reference to any product, service, or company in the podcast is an endorsement by Exceeder or its guests.